Let me see, I seem to be, I need to readjust my, okay, somebody has got to mute. Thank you so much, colleagues. Good afternoon, it is. Sanbonani, Dumelang, Jambo, Huenad, almost it is. Let me see, I seem to be, I need to readjust my, we are having our 9th. Okay, somebody has got to mute. Thank you so much, colleagues. Roundtable discussion. Afternoon it is. And this is how we started off in terms of each year we start off with matters that are very important. These being human rights. Of course, human rights take a very significant position in this country in particular, that is South Africa, as well as across Africa, because of the nature of our histories that are each year varied, and of course because of the diaspora. Now, the diaspora is very important to us, because that is where we have had to spread our wings far and beyond, outside of the African continent. My name is Professor Thenjiwe Meyiwa. I'm the Vice Principal responsible for research, postgraduate studies, innovation, and commercialization. It's a name that is quite long. Those that are within the university, they would know that we just simply cut it short and affectionately refer to it as research and innovation. I am hosting this 9th Asikhulume Roundtable discussion with the Unisa Press, that is a publishing house within the University of South Africa. And in doing so, I'm also just wanting to put a bit of some marketing that we expect you and every one of you to be very much involved in the work that I am hosting publishing house of Unisa. We are, by the way, the largest with the Unisa academic press that is a publishing on the African continent. I'm not going to take you through this and kind of like spoil your appetite. You go to our website and find out who we are and how to you as individuals as well as collectives come together to make a contribution to the generating of knowledge. Unisa Press, by the way, is about that. And for us at the University of South Africa, the university with the South African kind of like national name with the university that carries this name. We're very proud that we are on the 150 years of existence. Can you believe it? Wow. Generating. We're very proud of ourselves. That has been about today, and for us it being March, and we are starting with the human rights theme. The human rights theme becomes very important for various reasons, but I want to just go a bit beyond the shores of Africa, beyond the shores of South Africa first, before we come back home on the African continent, as well as in South Africa, and much more closer to us, just behind us here on our back door, to look at the University of South Africa. With this said, it is, I want to believe, that is a context that applies to a whole lot number of working contexts. Hence, the title that we have used this afternoon to name this roundtable, that we are looking at the roundtable as a human rights that's related to how we perform, how we relate as employees and employer, as recipients of whatever kind of service that's being done within the workplace. It may have been contextualized within the University of South Africa, but it goes beyond that. Every working place will have to be affected by this. And as you will know, 2.5 years ago, almost 3 years ago, we were affected by a pandemic that equals none other that we have experienced, at least this generation, that is COVID-19, which just dislodged us in many ways than one. And it dislodged us out of our offices, dislodged us out of public spaces, dislodged us out and away from engaging. But with that dislocation that we got from COVID-19, we learned a lot. We learned a lot and grew a lot. We developed a lot in terms of how we could perform differently from the technology point of view, continuing our work. And at Unisa, we're one of very few universities, if not, should I dare say, the only university that did not shift our calendar at all. Exams were written on time. Everything that we had set out the previous year was done on time. And the reason for that was, to a certain degree, because we had been always, as we are continuing to be, a university that's operating from the distance. But this distance that we operate from does not mean we need to be distant from the people that we're serving, that is students. This is one of the reasons that we have a student representative amongst us here. And I'm glad that on YouTube, as well as on the other platforms, on Facebook, as well as on LinkedIn, we have students across the board, as well as staff across the board that are participating in this kind of a work that we're doing this afternoon to ensure that we are not leaving anybody behind in checking on how could we do this differently for the benefit of the student in particular. I very much hold that the beneficiaries of the workplace should be dictated to by those that benefit from it, and therefore these may be employees, these may be students in the context of Unisa, these may be council at times or board, or these may be executive management. So these are all the kinds of matters that we're going to be talking about. And of course, these may be just the labor part, unions within a working space. But let me just reverse back to the promise that I had told you about, to just have a stretch of what we have had in the month of March. The month of March across the world is known as a month that is somehow referred to as the Black Africa historical month, as well as part of February, because this is restoration that we got to see from a number of countries, but in particular the northern side of America having delivered Africans out of slavery. So it is called a Black History Month, including parts of February. Within Africa, it is a month that is very important because if you look at a number of countries that got independence far before the country of South Africa, that is my home country, the month of March has been a month that's very important. And for us in South Africa, coming back home, we had to, by coincidence, very interesting, we had to have on the 21st of March, 1960, where police officers in a black township known as Sharpeville got to kill 69 people through the form that was later on referred to as Sharpeville Massacre. And this March 21 has become a day in which this country is recognizing as a human rights day country, but this month is a month of human rights. Hence the topic that we're looking at, and that we as Unisa, we as the working world, colleagues that are across the board, not only within the university, where we are saying, how could the working world, the office, should I put it like that, take cognizance of the human rights of those that are on the upper end, being board, council, being the executive management, but also those that are senior management. How could we take a leaf out of it and say, how do we make best of the human rights from the point of view of that lot? Should I use that word? But also on the other side, the employees, the labor unions, the students in our case, lower ranks of employees, as well as those that come for contract purposes or are partners, beneficiaries of any workplace. How do we benefit from the human rights that were set way back, centuries and centuries way back? But how do we interpret all of this in the context of the fact that we have had a visitor in the name of Mr. COVID-19 who actually got us to pause for 3 years almost and say, couldn't you work differently? Why are you not working differently? Mr. COVID made us to be just one village in the entire world. And of course, if you look at the fact that just yesterday, those that are in the business of environment will appreciate the fact that we had Earth Day throughout the world. This was yesterday. Yesterday, we celebrated the Earth Day in the sense that those that celebrated, of course, we appreciate the importance of, should I dare say, that it's not just only human beings that need to have rights, animal rights as well, but not just only fellow animals within the animal kingdom, but also plants as well, water as well, which makes yesterday, the 26th of March, as a day in which we connected as the entire world to say, let's have a happy earth hour in which we celebrate and look at how this was around 8 o'clock, the time across the globe yesterday, where we were looking at what it means for us to take all what we have come to be victims of, the climate change, because of us failing to respect, take care, and give rights to the animal world, to the environmental world, that's now sadly is firing right now. Besides that, this month, Umgeni Water across within Africa, South Africa, we have Umgeni Water that has declared this month as the month of appreciating water. Because water, aside the fact that it is a human right matter that's enshrined in the Constitution, it is also something that we need to take into account, given what water could do to us if we are rude to water, as we have demonstrated our rudeness as a human species. To animals, they backfire. We've been rude to the environment, it has backfired. We've been rude to the climate, it is continuing to backfire. So for this afternoon, as I draw closer to welcome every one of you and appreciate your presence here, those that have just joined us and those that are continuing and shall be coming back to look at this recording, because we're recording on LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, as well as MS Teams. We are asking ourselves, how is the month of March important under the banner of human rights, also in the context of national blackouts? If you really look into the national blackouts, it's because we've given, should I use my French here, we've given the middle finger to the environment. Had we embraced the sun very, very way back, we probably would not be experiencing this kind of blackouts in the extent in which we've experienced them within the country in particular, but across the continent. We know that many countries within the continent are suffering from the national blackouts. And recently, our European counterparts, in the name of the UK, Germany, amongst others, have recently joined us in these national blackouts. And I want to hold is because of the lack of human rights that are being accorded to marketing. What are the conditions in the workplace that seem to infringe and go against the human rights due to and because of the power blackouts? We also are asking that we find ourselves being exposed to, and therefore, how do we learn from the histories of the past, and how do we learn from the struggles that are made reference to in a number of history books, but more importantly, from as well as this month of human rights and the Sharpeville massacre of 1960, 21 March. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls across the globe, where you are experiencing this roundtable, we shall have it from the point of view of a number of panel members that I shall be introducing to you as we present them to you. I will start off with Dr. Phumzile Dlamini. Dr. Phumzile Dlamini is the Acting Executive Director of the Human Resources. So this is the queen pin of the employer context, and she's going to be looking at from the questions that we've had, as well as from the context from which she comes, or how do we work with what we need to be working with in terms of ensuring that neither of the rights are actually affected. And I'm requesting that if you could please switch off your mics, please. If you could switch off your mics. Thank you. Colleagues, please ensure that whoever comes in, their mic is switched off. Just quickly come in. So at this juncture, we're going to ask Dr. Dlamini to come forth and share with us her ideas around what we're discussing this afternoon, and in the context of the introductory remarks that I have made. I know that because of a connection that is not and may not be equal across all my panel members, we may have to have colleagues showing their face for a short while and then switch off, then we listen more on what they are saying. And in this juncture, therefore, I request that Dr. Dlamini ascends the stage as she gives us her thoughts on the topic of the afternoon. Dr. Dlamini, please, ma'am.
Thank you very much, Prof. Meyiwa and colleagues. Apologies, I am not feeling well. However, I'm going to be attending your session. I appreciate your introductory remarks in the month of March. And if we all recall that when COVID-19 started and the closure of the country, it was on the 26th of March, 2020. So I align myself with the introduction of the month and its history. And also the theme for 2023 for human rights, it's about consolidating and sustaining human rights culture into the future. We have to ask ourselves then as to how does human rights meet human resources? As an employer, we've got an obligation to provide a safe and healthy environment which is free from harassment, because human rights is not supposed to be discriminatory in nature in terms of your race, your religion, your gender, etc. Therefore, human rights also does not require employees to be the target of hateful or venomous workplace. Immediately when the employer becomes aware of such conduct, it is within the legislation or the prescripts that are available to ensure that employees are given an opportunity wherein they can bring in their complaints when they face themselves, wherein their issues of human rights are being violated, using the very same human resources policies which governs employment relationship. I want to pose a question. Are we not exercising human rights from an ivory tower? Human rights cannot be done from ivory tower. It cannot be done in the fashion that we are doing, where we sit in boardroom and talk about human rights. Human rights must not exclude the grassroots people. whom they have got a voice, and who knows as to what need to be done in the challenges that we are having. In other words, what are we learning from a traditional type of governance in ensuring that we learn over and above the available prescripts? Human rights must not replace or delete responsibility. We are living in a situation wherein we find ourselves where we are in a situation where there's a lawless society. It is your responsibility and my responsibility in ensuring that we bring back the human rights culture that we used to have. We cannot talk about human rights without talking about emotional, psychological, and economic matters. Then we'll be incomplete by doing that. We cannot talk about human rights by hearing the voice of those who are at the bottom without involving them. As we are all aware that as Unisans, there are cries of students and stakeholders who are fundamental to the organization to provide teaching and learning, including research and innovation. But what is it that we are doing in ensuring that they contribute in solving the problems that we are having as the university? We cannot define our relationship as Africans, yet we deepen the colonial agenda. The question then that I ask myself is, yes, when COVID-19 came, has it not eroded our communal life? During COVID-19, we find that the spirit of Ubuntu Muntu Muntu Ngaba was slowly becoming the subject of the past, while isolation and individualization were becoming more central. We find ourselves with a fragmented society wherein our relatives were not allowed to cross the borders to provinces to come and bury their relatives, because if you are married to Meyiwa, yet you are born in the Dlamini, as long as the surname is not similar, then you are not allowed to come and cross the border. Did it not erode our communal life? We're still not sure whether the people that we have buried, whom we call their relatives, who passed during the COVID-19, whether indeed we buried the right people, because we were deprived opportunity to say goodbye to our deceased people, because they were covered from mortuary until the graveyard, and the number was limited as well to 50 to those who buried. The question is, as researchers, are the bones of our bones that we have buried are the correct one? It's a subject for research. Meaning of losing a loved one and the new buzzword in the market of after tears. Whose traditional culture have after tears when we are mourning your loved one? Have we not lost meaning of death and pain of losing the loved ones? Let me go back, Prof. Meyiwa, as we correctly indicated that there's a history of blackness in the month of March. Slaughtering a cow when the deceased or when you have lost a loved one was not about feasting or having a braai or eating meat, but at that time, there were no caskets or expensive coffins. The skin was used to cover up the body of the deceased one in such a way that the family was not even allowed to feast on that meat. And it was actually eaten without salt, because it was a symbol of actually respecting the one who has gone and passed away. I'm asking a question. After tears, whose culture is it? Our human rights are celebrated without us. We need to find the rhythm and define who we are. Are we transforming our organization? Are we treating one another in an acceptable manner? We find trust deficit, we find hatred amongst ourselves. We have lost love. Just to ask one another, sawubona unjani ngiyabonga. It has gone from our society. Is our pedagogue speaking to our African knowledge? Who is writing about us without us? Can we openly claim that we are enjoying human rights? Are our libraries transformed to impart knowledge about us, or it's only colonial knowledge that is written about us without us? Can we safely say we are owning our libraries? Yes, we do acknowledge as Unisa the renaming and naming of our buildings. But what is taught inside this building? Is the curricula in line with the names written in front of our doors and buildings? We've got Prof. Radibere, we've got Simon R.R. Maluleke, you name Winnie Madikizela Mandela building. What are we teaching our students within the context of Africanization, indigenization, decolonization? Are we talking about African philosophy and epistemology, or are we practicing colonial content? How do we then address inequality within the space of human rights? Every day we are faced with students who do not have money to register, who sleep without food, even our employees. We are addressing inequality and poverty, but we are not actually engaging with those who are suffering from poverty. Yet there's a history of human rights wherein our grandfathers and mothers used to plow and were able to sustain themselves before even the promissory note, which we call it money, was not even there. We are being rhetoric about addressing inequality and poverty. Africa keeps on borrowing and asking for funding from those who make us perpetual beggars and subordinates. I can name international monetary funds and other financial services. We continue borrowing money. We can only stop this if we can begin to drink from our own wells and eat from our own hands. Let's go back to our roots. We are talking about load shedding and blackouts. How were we surviving in the past before there was electricity? Those are the questions that we need to research about it. But our grandfathers and grandmothers were surviving even though there was no electricity. It is a misrepresentation to speak on behalf of the poor without consulting them or allowing them to speak for themselves. Are we not contributing towards violation of their human rights and perpetuating inequality and poverty by so doing? Those are the questions that I'm asking out of this forum, so that when we continue to ensure that we are embracing the human rights in 2023 by ensuring that we are consolidating and sustaining human rights culture into the future. Those are the main things that we need to embrace and also put within our research space, including our human resources to teach our nation. I thank you, Chairperson and members of the panel.
Wow, thanks a lot, Dr. Dlamini, for that. You've really put our thinking in an elastic fashion, I must say. The challenge that you have put to us equals a whole lot number of items that go beyond your specification. But I'm very heartened to see how you weave through human resource into a number of elements to which you've made reference. I like the question where you pose, what could we do differently? And also which somehow links to the issue of dignity, the issue of erosion of communal life due to the absence of working in a manner that's considering us indeed as human beings, abantu ngoba bangabantu ngabantu indeed. But earlier on, your first question was, how do we get human rights, meet human resources in a manner that makes us all successful? Thanks for that. At this juncture, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, can I request that you send your questions, should we have any, or we will be looking at how our panel gets to be reflecting also on previous panel members' items of their chat, which is presentations or reflections of a maximum of 10 minutes. I will be queuing you, and there's only 1 minute left for you to draw to a close. Thank you so much for that, Dr. Dlamini, for starting off this stage. We certainly are going to come back to you and hoping that we shall do so through comments as well that are put together by our patrons across the platforms. We now are going to have Vus Dlamini. Vus is the Director of Compliance within the Department of Risk and Compliance. I hope we'll hear more about compliance or being compliant to human rights. I don't know. As a compliant an officer and somebody who's really indeed directing compliance to ensure that risks, this is just my interpretation of your portfolio, Vusi, that we'll hear more about what's his take on these matters of human rights in the workplace, despite all the challenges that we've had in the past and that we continue to have, and possible to a certain degree, you may want to, it's actually all up to you in the 10 minutes to check on what you want to share with our patrons across the platforms in terms of what you deem to be important for you as a compliance officer. Over to you, please, Vos.
Thank you very much, Program Director, and the people who are attending this session. Program Director, the issue of human rights is very vast, as you've put it yourself, and as Dr. Dlamini has talked about. Africa due to our constitutional dispensation, which put more emphasis on human rights. Chair, but then I will just limit my my discussion on the rights of the employee in the workplace. Right. In the workplace, people have a right, for example, in South Africa, to occupational health and safety, as provided for by the Occupational Health and Safety Act. So, as and when you are working, whether on campus or at home, the employer has a duty to provide you with an environment that is safe and secure and is healthy for you. So it's not detrimental to your health and your safety, right? So it constitutes a right of an employee at work. Another a set of rights, Chair, are constituted in terms of the Popaya Act, which talks to privacy, because we are the employee of the university or any other organization, wherever we may be coming from. So the employer processes our personal information, be it our identity numbers, our names, our next of kin, that kind of information. So we have a right to privacy in terms of the Constitution 1, but as well as giving effect to by the Protection of Personal Information Act. Right. And then another right that I thought was relevant to this conversation is the right to be treated to be treated and remunerated fairly. So that one is constituted in your Employment Equity Act legislation. So every employee has a right to be remunerated fairly for the value that they deliver for the employer. And then another one is the right that is provided for by the Labor Relations Act, where we have a right to join and participate in So we have a right to join any labor union of our choice, one, and secondly, to participate in any collective bargaining, whether it is striking, whatever. We have a right as long as it is illegal. As long as it is legal, right? And then finally, you have your Basic Conditions of Employment Act, which provides for conditions of employment, right? So it provides minimum standards that employers have to comply with in terms of providing the standards to their employees. For example, in South Africa, you cannot work more than 40 hours, right? If you work on a Sunday or a public holiday, for example, your remuneration cannot be as normal. It has to be more than that because you're sacrificing your holiday or your Sunday, right? So then we come to the issue of your load shedding and how does it affect these rights, right? Not all of these rights are going to be relevant when judged against that prism or when looked through that prism. I found it to be very relevant, especially when it comes to occupational health and safety, because that law requires of the employer to provide safety conditions for the employees. Now, if the employer has got systems that are supposed to make us safe and secure at work, and those depend on power and energy, and suddenly you do not have power, surely that is going to affect the rights of the employees. I can make an example of aircons, right? Aircons are regulated under the OHS Act, and then during load shedding, obviously there wouldn't be power, and people would not have access. Those things would not be working, so it would affect surely the rights of employees to a working environment that is able to meet the minimum standards as provided for by this legislation. Another thing that you can think of is the issue of lifts. There are employees who cannot walk 10 stairs up in OR Tambo building. So those people need lifts. So if lifts are not working due to power outage, then there is a problem because their rights are affected. And then also in terms of our employees, we employ people who are physically challenged, so those people require certain things in the workplace, right? You have to, like the lifts, so that person cannot use a wheelchair to go 10 stairs up. They need the lift. If the lift is not working, surely their rights are affected, right? And then I would also talk to where it is relevant again. I thought it would be under the basic conditions of employment, right? So you are in a print production environment, for example, where you are expected to produce a certain amount of printed material, right? Study material, something like that. And then due to load shedding, you are not able to meet your target. What do? There is a temptation on the part of the employer to make people work longer hours than it is allowed for in terms of legislation. So those things could easily become abuses of human rights because people cannot work more than a certain number of hours within a week, within a month, within a 3-month period. So if those are aggregated and weighted over that long period. So employers have to be very, 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 very careful as far as those things are concerned. So I've highlighted the challenges and instances where these human rights abuses can arise, right? Now I'll speak to the issue of the working conditions that we can adopt, right? As you rightly put it, Program Director, you spoke about COVID-19 and how it taught us of new works of working, right? So we've resorted to working remotely to obviate the problem of COVID-19. But then at the same time, we are now supposed to go back to campus to deliver our services on campus because of load shedding, right? Because now on campus or at the place of work, the employer might provide for unlimited power supply systems, which some of us may not have access to working remotely. Now, people now have to go back. So we have to mitigate the issue of blackouts by doing away with the new way of working. But then there are challenges there, because you call people back to come on campus, then they are there, and then as an employer, you may not be able, for example, to provide the things that I spoke about due to load shedding, right? You may have the power systems like your power generator that is able to generate power, but it is not enough, because it only provides power to plugs where you can use like your laptop, like your thing. But the systems that use more power are not covered. So people are still exposed, you know. Like some people must have an aircon to work. Like it's summer in South Africa, the temperatures can go very high. Some people have to have access to a working aircon. It is not working because your UPS system is not able to provide the power required to run those systems. So as an employer, now you have to ask yourself, how do you come out of this conundrum, right? So I suggest as a solution that we adopt flexible way of thinking, right? Like human rights themselves, they are not fixed, right? They are fixed in terms of they are written on paper in the Constitution. But now, if you look at the way the world of work is evolving, or the world in general is evolving, those rights should evolve. For example, I would ask a question. Due to the advancement in technology and due to the issues that we've had with COVID-19, one, and secondly, due to us having adopted remote working, has it not become the right of employees to work flexibly as long as they are able to deliver or the value that is required by the employer? For example, if a person can demonstrate that I can deliver more than 120% of my outputs in a week working remotely, does that person not have a claim against the employer to say, you do not have a right to call me back to a physical place where I have to deliver my services, right? So like I'm saying, human rights are flexible. So we have to we have to adjust we have to adapt in our thinking, because human rights themselves are not fixed, are not cast in stone. They evolve as and when things change, as and when technology advances. For me, my opinion is the right to work remotely or flexibly is a right that must be recognized in terms of policy, in terms of employment policy. Because I think if we do think to that extent and adopt that, it will help us to evolve as an institution where our people have an interest in their work, because it favors their own personal circumstances without lessening or without releasing them from their contractual obligation of delivering in terms of their performance agreements. Chair, I'll stop it there. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mr. Mahlangu, for that. Just when I was about to say you have 1.5 minutes left, you stopped. Wow, that's a mouthful in terms of taking us to a different narrative around what the employer has got to be complying with and what the employee's rights are. We possibly have got to engage, just to move back a bit, colleagues, to get Dr. Dlamini to respond a bit to some of this. But I'm just wondering, before she does so, just to reflect on what Mr. Mahlangu has said, right to privacy, promotion of personal, promotion of protection of personal information, somehow making reference to right to identity. If you're following news, you'll know that Uganda is in actually a very bad state right now in shape, a right to being remunerated fairly and all of that. What I missed here, Busi, was rights of the employer. I heard less about that. Possibly at this stage, if you could just share with our patrons, does the employer not have any rights as a compliance officer? What's your view on that? And then after that, we could have Dr. Dlamini, if she deems so, or possible can do later, to respond to what you've made reference to as, what if I'm productive wherever I am? What does that mean? But let's just first hear what Ms. Mahlangu has got to say about the rights of the employer, or expectations, should I put it like that, of the employer, possible. Mr. Mahlangu, please, are you able to just briefly take us through from the compliance point of view? What rights does an employer have in the context in which we're discussing this afternoon?
Thank you very much, Program Director. Probably you recall that for every right there is an obligation, and for every obligation there is a right. Right. So the employer firstly has a right to, because they hire you, they give you an employment contract and a performance agreement. You have to perform. You have to meet certain standards, right? The employer has policies that seek to encapsulate the values of the employer that must be lived. So all of us as employees have a right, one, to deliver on our performance agreements, on the expectations of the employer, one. Secondly, we have to behave in a certain way that meets the values of the employer. So as employees, those are our obligations. On the other hand, they are the rights of the employer. The employer has the right to demand those things of us. So no employee should claim their rights before they meet their obligations, just as the employer has no right to claim his or her rights before they deliver in terms of their obligations. So it is a symbiotic relationship. There is no another without the other. So you must meet your obligations before you can claim your rights, and your obligations are the rights of the other party, whereas their obligations are your rights. So I hope I covered that question clearly, Program Director. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Dlamini, there's reference to some of what Mr. Mahlangu makes reference to. I don't think it sits within your space as an HRED, and I must thank you that you have, despite your ill health, availed for this conversation, this discussion we're having around this table, that I'm not taking for granted. But Ms. Mahlangu makes reference to, what if I'm productive? Does that not give me some leeway and therefore have access, or should be having access to, a flexible way of delivering my service and labor to the employer? That's the question that I heard him asking. Aside, of course, the other one that I don't think you are able to respond to unless you want to, of safety. Because some of what he's making reference to, which I can so very much concur and relate with, when lifts are not working, with my arthritis having to, which often happens more in the morning, have to get on the 10 floors upwards trying to get to my office. Will that not mean some employer has forsaken my safety? I don't think that's part of what you can respond to. But are you able, Dr. Dlamini, to take us through your thoughts on productivity? What if you're productive of where your base sits, or you're expected by the employer to be, given the lessons of the past that we've drawn from COVID-19, for instance? Should that not be somehow a right that is accorded the employee, is that a right at all? I'm just wondering, sitting here, that is that really a right, or as per the contract, there is an obligation? Dr. Dlamini, your thinking?
Thank you very much, Prof and colleagues. Every right has got limitations. I understand the question that it's about the situation of COVID where employees find themselves working from home and there was a remote working. However, there was a change then where employers are requiring their employees to be back at work. Over and above everything, the contract of employment kicks in the event there is a dispute wherein there is no meeting of mind between the employer and the employees. The remote working policy was not actually made to be forever. It was only introduced to address the pandemic at that particular time. And also, you will recall, Prof. Meyiwa, that the actual implementation part of the policy was one of the gray areas that was not actually addressed when the policy was negotiated at that particular time before my time. Indeed, you are correct that there are some colleagues who are productive if they're at home, but not all of them. But it also requires an employer to have a tool to measure productivity in order to ensure that employees are actually performing according to their contract of employment. Also, it is the responsibility of line managers to ensure that employees fulfill their contractual obligation. You'll agree with me that in some areas, employees have become more ineffective whilst they were at home. Sometimes you will hear that there are children or dogs barking whilst it's the time of the employer. Sometimes, even if students require services, they were not at work. So how then do you balance the two when you require the service and the employee is not available? And it is not only applicable to Unisa. Other organizations, internationally, nationally, have already called their employees because they've seen that some of environment working from home is not working. And also, we need to ask ourselves whether refusing to return to office does it not mean lay off the part of the employee, wherein you find yourself that by your own conduct as an employee, you find yourself that the employer might end up to say, but by the way, I was able to work with the current people online, and a certain job might be automatically become supernumerary. These are the issues that we need to ask ourselves, colleagues, that there are changes in different organizations and the needs are differ as well in terms of geospatial as well, because there are certain areas wherein students do not have access to electricity or computers because we're living in South Africa. There are still deep rural areas, and they believe that if they come to campus and seek for a service, we have to cater for them as well. So remote working did not actually address all the problems of the society that we are faced with. Hence, my question was saying, human rights, are we balancing it with those who are at the bottom? Are we hearing their voices, or we are talking about human rights in the ivory tower without looking at other people who are actually suffering because of the very same human rights that we are trying to talk about it today? So those are my comments. And indeed, when it comes to OHS issues, it's a compliance issue, and we cater for various types of employees, including students. is our environment user-friendly for our stakeholders? Those are the questions that we need to debate about it and ensure that we have to comply and also addressing issues of human rights. Thank you.
Wow, thanks, Satlamini, for that. Your reference to students seems to be leapfrogging us to a certain degree. One of our panel members that we have, that is Inganathi Ketwa, we'll get to hear him a little later, but after Rufumo Nkuna. Mr. Rufumo Nkuna is of Nehau. So he comes, as we know, Nehau is about labor, is about the rights of those that are in the labor force. So let's hear what in the 10 minutes that we have given him, he wants to share with our patrons as well as with the panel in terms of what his views are on the subject of human rights versus the rights and responsibilities and accountability of those that are expecting service, but also of those that should be offering the service. Because, as Mr. Mahlangu has rightly said, they are remunerated. And in instances of remuneration, will you be remunerated and be paid without having provided service? Let's hear what Mr. Nkuna has got to say. As we welcome Mr. Nkuna on stage at this time, if you could please come through Rufumo.
Thank you very much, Program Director, and greetings to all panel members and the participants on all social media platforms. Thank you very much. As Nehau, we pay homage to our struggle fighters who have suffered justice and freedom for this land, who fought for justice and freedom for this land, sorry to say, for the rights that we are enjoying today. Chair, allow me to make an indication that Mr. Mahlangu stole most of my points that I wanted to pose to the panel. However, allow me to say that our observation as a union during load shedding, we noted or we have realized that the access control and security systems are compromised in the university, highly actually, which is posing a serious risk to the safety of members of staff, the theft of vehicles in the institution, and the safety of the university assets, among others. I want to pose this question to the panel members, in particular, Mr. Mahlangu, if he can assist in this one, as to what is their role as compliance director? What is their role if a risk is identified in this regard? The second one, it's the issue around the right to equality. There was an indication that I picked up that, which also goes together, in my view, with Occupational Health and Safety Act, where there was an indication that lifts are not working. Whenever there's load shedding, lifts may not be working, and it may be difficult for colleagues who may not have strength to evacuate the buildings. I just wanted to check that also, what roles are played by management in terms of addressing those risks, subjecting members of staff to such risks that might ultimately subject the 16.1 to some penalty or imprisonment. I want to also indicate that ICT systems are affected during load shedding, and as a result, workers are unable to efficiently perform their duties and meet the targets, which this by its own, it impacts service delivery to the students. That directly violates Section 29 of the Constitution of the Republic, the right to basic conditions, the right to basic education. I just want to ask the panel as to what is it that is in place that will assist in addressing those issues around ICT systems being not operational at that specific time. The last part, as I indicated, that most of the points were stolen by Mr. Matang. I just want to pose a question also as to what is it that the employer is doing in regards to protecting the staff members against being intimidated, unfairly treated, or subjected to poor performance due to them arriving late to work that might have been caused by the congestions on the road due to power blackouts. Chair, I think I can pause there for now, but most of my questions were actually stolen by Mr. Matang. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Nkuna, for that. You've really thrust us in a much more difficult position. But I very much appreciate your points of pointing questions to the panel, making your observations about security that gets compromised and risks of safety due to, amongst others, the rights of non-equality, my reading of what you were saying, due to the load shedding that will have come on people or within the labor force, but also which are, sadly, I'm just realizing that Ms. Swanepoel and Ntosane and Ms. Malema, we possibly should have had more people coming through here, just from the questions that our panel members are posing. Safety ones that security related should have been responded to by hopefully the VP for operations or one of his team members, ICT systems as well, to which Mr. Nkuna's made reference, that talk about the issue of the systems that get affected due to load shedding. And then the one that I'm expecting, as Mr. Nkuna has also asked Mr. Mahlangu to speak to, is the one of risk in terms of in their risk register. To what degree is the issue of safety for the reasons of trying to avail for work is attended to? So I'm requesting that Mr. Mahlangu responds here, but also Dr. Dlamini, if you could give us your thoughts around what Mr. Nkuna has made reference to. In instances where, due to load shedding, you arrive at work later than what you had planned because of road congestions caused by power blackouts, how do issues of performance by a line manager get to be managed in that fashion? So in that order, please, fellow panel members, if you could get Vusi to respond to the first question of how are risk matters to which Mr. Nkuna has made reference to taken care of, and how could we expect this to be attended to for the benefit of employees? Bruce, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Program Director, and thank you, Mr. Nkuna, for the thought-provoking points that you raised. Firstly, I must point out that the responsibility to provide safety and security to employees and their property while they are on campus is that of the employer, right? So our role as the Department of Risk and Compliance is that of facilitating compliance and effective risk management. How do we do that? So we are a critical stakeholder to compliance and risk management, right? So our first point of call is to highlight the problem to the employer. The employer that is this problem that exposes the employees to this risk and the employer to this risk, to this non-compliance. And the consequence of that is this. So we must urge the employer through because we are compliance champions, we are compliance advocates. So we must urge the employer, whatever means we can, just entice the employer to come and correct that situation. But then if you cannot get joy out of that, unfortunately, we have to report that to senior management. So we go one level up to senior management, up until to council. Reporting that is to say it is a problem for the university. Unfortunately, we do not have any power we can't do anything other than engaging with the employer, pointing out the issues and the risks that the employer is open to and the employees are open to, and reporting that to management firstly, because management has the responsibility to ensure that the thing is corrected. Right, so it has to go, for example, if the director is responsible for fixing that, it must go to the ED, escalated, then it must go up to the level of MENCOM, up to the VC, and up to the relevant council committees and to council itself to say there's this problem that is not being fixed at the university. So yeah, that's all that we can do. But I promise you, we make a lot of noise. We engage with people. We do not rely only on email. We actually come to you, talk to you, even if it's socially, to say, hey, correct that problem. It poses a very big problem for the university. That's all we can do, Mr. Nkun. Thank you.
Thanks for that. Rifumo, you may want to respond later on. I don't want to be posing all these questions amongst the panel members because we're yet to open the floor to a bigger audience. Dr. Dlamini, your question as posed by or made reference to by Mr. Nkuna, before we lose it, I'm just thinking amongst the panel members, if you are able to respond to some of the points that are being made. He's asked, I'm stuck in traffic, if I may to paraphrase that. I'm stuck in traffic due to power blackouts that are not of my making, which makes me arrive late at work and that impacts my performance and by extension lead me to be a non-performer and probably cost some of the promotion and or bonuses that I may have received. Dr. Dlamini, your thoughts?
Thank you very much, Madam Chairperson. Firstly, it is a dual responsibility of an employee to ensure that he or she notify the line manager about the delay. All of us, as you are aware, we do have a scheduling of load shedding. If it's early in the morning, which means you need to leave early at home so that you should be able to beat the traffic on the road. Secondly, the line manager must also check the whereabouts of the employee because you might find that the person is held up on load shedding, yet there might be some other challenges. That is why I'm saying it's a dual responsibility. Also, we are regulated by working time policy, which Mr. Nkuna will agree with me. He's a member of the Unisa Bargaining Forum. There is a policy also on flexi hours. there are various policies that are regulating the workplace. Therefore, being held on load shedding cannot be an excuse, members of the panel. You can be actually be reporting to say, okay, today my load shedding is starting at 6 o'clock. Therefore, you have to leave, let's say earlier, because the following day the schedule might not be the same. Issues of performance. There are people, even though they are having challenges, they make sure that they deliver according to their contract of employment. There are those also, even if they have challenges, if they are supposed to be assisted, colleagues like Mr. Ngona will come and protect them. Yet, it is very clear the role of the union is being a watchdog of the employer. That is why it's so important to have this discussion during the Human Rights Month to ensure that it must not be management responsibility to also look after employees who might be challenged in the workplace. Union also have got the responsibility to assist management to help those employees who might be challenged for various reasons. There are psychosocial factors. We are all aware that people are heavily indebted, people are sick, which might contribute to their productivity. We've got programs in place to assist those employees. Therefore, I challenge Mr. Ngona to say we are here as unisons and as human beings in the month of human rights to assist in each other in ensuring that we empower our colleagues so that they become productive in the workplace. The issue of bonus is not automatic. It is also informed by performance. Therefore, as the year is starting, we should be able to have early warning to say, hey, this employee might be having a challenge. We do have performance improvement plan. We do have interventions in place as Unisa. Let us use those opportunities to empower each other. If there's a need, maybe to train an employee, we are more than welcome, Mr. Ngona, to take all your inputs and then work together in making Unisa a good institution for all of us so that we can be proud whilst we are going to be celebrating 150 years this year. I thank you, Chairperson.
Thanks, Dr. Dlamini, for that. I'm actually thinking that and hoping we are somehow responding to some of the questions or giving triggers to questions that are going to come up. Last on our list, but not least in terms of importance, but if anything, the most important stakeholder, the student. I always and often say that without the student, the university doesn't exist. We may as well all have got to go home because without that stakeholder, we are as good as an NGO that's doing whatever we may or should be doing, but not university work. We could, thinking of my portfolio, easily be a research council or a council organization that is doing just research, be it market-related research or social research or any kind of research or political research. But we're not there. We're not a research company. We are a university because of students. At this juncture, I'm calling upon onto the stage, which is now the time for Inganati Ketwa, who's the National Student Representative Council's Deputy Secretary at the national level. Mr. Ketwa, it is your turn now, sir, to come up onto the stage and share your thoughts as well as the voice from the student side, somehow and hoping you will be reverberating what Dr. Dlamini said earlier on in terms of how are we balancing the needs of those that are the beneficiaries, those that are at the bottom, and cease to be an ivory tower. Over to you, please, sir.
Thank you very much, Program Director. Prof. Meyiwa, members that have joined us both virtually on MS Teams and on YouTube, students that have joined us. I've seen some few SRC leaders, members of the union, members of regional management. I see the regional director of Gauteng, Mema Salisa, has also joined us. I think you said something very mouthful that students are the primary stakeholders of the university, and without students, the institution wouldn't be in existence. But funny enough is that some directors do not take that into consideration or take students, more especially student leaders, seriously in terms of engagement and other things of the university. But however, I think we ought to address the question at hand about load shedding and its impact in Unisa context. I must say that load shedding has had a massive impact on the higher education and continues to have an effect on all universities and colleges. It ranges from different problems that are faced by students. But I think we must start off by saying that load shedding or power outages are a threat to the South African's economy, education sector, and all other key important sectors, necessitating a quick and a long-term solution to the country's electrical issue. Additionally, load shedding has a detrimental influence on our education, as well as other sectors, and may have a long-term impact on the country's educational growth. The country's ability to navigate the fourth industrial revolution is dependent on a dependable supply of power. Imminent power outages caused by Eskom is inefficient power, reducing capacity have significantly hampered the transition to the digital era. While university institutions are in registration processes, systems shut down on a daily basis and millions of students are forced to register from homes. And that is our biggest problems, because the university systems, especially Unisa, are not really user-friendly, more especially to those students who are not computer literate. So if a student from KwaZulu is unable or is faced by a load shedding, therefore that means that student won't be able to register fully online. So those are part and parcel of the problems that our students are faced with. Some students and instructors may have to acclimate to online teaching once again. This has time hampered a shortage by the electricity system. Students are particularly heavily impacted. Several institutions are in the midst of registration processes, and online sessions are being used to substitute traditional papers or online portals for registration submissions. As you would know that before we were visited by this evil COVID-19, we used to write our exams in showgrounds and across all other venue-based platforms. But ever since we were challenged with COVID-19 and as well as load shedding, we were forced to change into the online system. Without power, going online is difficult. Students are unable to use their phones for data, owing to a lack of signal, and others are compelled to leave their houses in search of energy and an internet connection. Once again, I will make an example about a student that is in the Eastern Cape. If they are challenged or they are facing load shedding challenges, there is a less connectivity network. So it's very important that we note such problems, and we have addressed these problems in different platforms through the VP of ICT and also the VP of teaching and learning, so that they are able to assist those students who are struggling and also incorporate them so that they don't lose the academic year. So students are particularly heavily impacted with this matter of load shedding, and it is an infringement to the right that is enshrined in the Constitution, which is the right to education. The impact of load shedding on learning, especially on South Africans' ambitions, intention to move education into a digital era, is significantly more difficult to measure in the short term, but equally catastrophic in the medium and long term. Social and economic imbalances continue to plow our educational systems, and the current electrical problem is contributing to the unfairness. There are still too many schools with inadequate and non-existent power infrastructure, but even for those that do, the capacity to manage load shedding without affecting instruction will vary according to the socio-economic position. This capacity to reduce the damage applies equally to higher education. But in conclusion, the power outage poses a major threat to South Africa's growth in terms of our technology in education. The energy supply is having an influence on South Africa's educational growth to the degree that the power crisis affects teaching and learning on a daily basis, and to the extent that it inhibits our capacity to fully engage in a digitally enabled educational development. So COVID-19, as well as these power outages, have played a pivotal role in the disruption of our education system. Even in Unisa, the number of growth of plagiarism has grown. It's more outrageous. In our last engagement with the head of disciplinary hearing, Mr. Shevam, he said the number has doubled or tripled because the systems that have been put in place are not enough, are not adequate enough. But in conclusion, I want to thank you, everyone who has attended, and hopefully that all these problems that I've just mentioned on top will be addressed by all relevant stakeholders. I thank you.
Thanks a lot, Inga, for that. I thought you were going to talk a bit about, it may not be you, but possible from your constituency about working from the offices as we used to have. You know, the impact of remote working for students. But your reference to load shedding is certainly accentuating some of the observations that have been made by the registrar's office, as well as the finance, in particular CFO's presentations. You make reference to the fact that the online sessions that have replaced the good old sessions that got the teacher to be able to be in front of his students has led to the failures that we see today. And somehow, due to the load shedding, we see that progress and process, as well as leading to success, is hampered and has exacerbated inequalities that we now see. That indeed power outages cause crises as you end, and therefore you're saying that part of that crisis that has come to bear on us are incidents of plagiarism. So here we are, colleagues, those that are on various platforms, but also this one. I'm checking for comments or inputs that you may want to make, but we'll want us to do that after Inga has taken a bite on remote working relative to, although we're seeing more and more people going back to the offices, some of us are in the offices quite often than we used to be in the past, but it will be interesting to get students a view of the lack of or the presence of employees of the university within the offices, as was the case in the past. Inga, are you able to respond to that before you open the floor?
No, thank you very much, Program Director, Prof. Meyiwa. Well, I think I must say that it has had a huge impact on students. Normally, students who used to visit lecturers in main campuses or various campuses. Hence why I touched more on the part to say that students who are less disadvantaged, who generally used to depend on human resources and now are forced to depend on online resources, it has had a very negative impact on them, because now for them they must have data to fully participate online. They must have better connect. They must have a better connection. So it has had a huge impact, as well as the opening of libraries. Because as you would know or recall that libraries and computer labs that used to operate for certain hours, that has changed. But hopefully that will be addressed as well in the meantime. So to answer your question, I must say that it has had a huge negative impact, mostly on disadvantaged students and students who are from poor backgrounds and are from far or deep in the trenches of our rural areas of the country.
Wow, colleagues, here we are. We've heard from. I wanted us to end with Inga, because I wanted that we get left with that picture of how the student constituency is being affected or benefits from whatever we do as university employees. Can I check with my team, Dr. Ntwesane, Ms. Swanepoel, and Ms. Malema? Are there any comments or questions that we have that we may want to pose to our panel members? Anything that you have received from your end? Of course, appreciating the fact that looking at the time that we had, I had to predict what may be questions of interest from our patrons and pose those to our panel members. Could we hear from you, colleagues?
Prof, there's nothing yet, but we keep on looking and we'll let you know as soon as there's some questions coming out from the other platforms.
Okay. Can I just take this opportunity and abuse my seat as the facilitator to pose the question to, let me see who has spoken the list possible. Let me start with Vusi. I know that Vusi didn't speak the list, but I know that in my thinking, let me not just say I know, lest I misrepresent facts. Vusi is a compliance officer who deals, of course, as he has made a reference to earlier, with compliance matters within the Department of Risk and Compliance. I'm just wondering that besides what you shared, is there anything that you have a sense that you've left out that you would want to share with our patrons and the panel in terms of what, therefore, are expectations beyond what you've shared with us already, to ensure that you comply the best that we can as a university and as working places across the board on these matters that we've made reference to. Is there anything that you'd like to make reference to? As I've noted Inga's hand, but at this time, if there's anything that Vusi may want to share, I'll appreciate that. Ms. Mahlangu, anything from your end?
Yes, Chair. Thank you very much, Program Director. As you rightly put it, we are compliance officers, so we'd like to take the opportunity to advance our cause, of course, as a department that is facilitating compliance at the university, and point out that all of us in this forum have a responsibility towards compliance. Where you see rights being abused, please raise those issues. There are processes within the university. There are what you call it, there are places where you can go to raise those issues, report those issues of abuses. We have also a hotline that is protected, the way you can whistleblow, send these things there. You see harassment, you are being a victim of harassment, please report those issues. Do not remain silent, because we want to get rid of this culture of harassment, of abuses. There's a project that we're doing with the department leadership and transformation, where we are advancing for grounding the issue of transformation at the university across the 8 elements of transformation at the university. So I'm in a way champion of transformation as well as a compliance officer. Please report those issues, and where you see a non-compliance, please report it. But also remember that yourself, you are responsible for compliance wherever you are as you carry out the business of the university. So the issue of human rights with compliance, they are tied together, because if each one of us ensures that our rights are protected, then there is compliance at the end of the day. That is integrated thinking, that is integration in thinking, because there is no one without the other. And the moment we start to do these things at the operational level, and the bigger picture at the university is going to change, where we are going to have a university that is not only saying we are about transformation, we are about human rights, but we are seen to be doing those things in practice. So as diverse stakeholders as we are, we have a responsibility. And the moment we start exercising those powers that we have as stakeholders, the better for the university. Because the sin is not with the abusers, but it is with the people who remain silent when they see these things. Thank you, Program Director.
Thanks a lot for that. I see we have hands. We'll start with a panel member. If we could have Inganati to please come forward. I'm recognizing your hand, please.
Thank you very much, Program Director. Well, my question is posed to the Acting Director, Ms. Phumzile Dlamini. We have received
Executive Director. She's the acting Executive Director. Just a correction. Thanks, Inga.
All right. No, thank you very much. Just to pose a few questions to her. Well, we have received quite a number of complaints about the performance of Unisa workers at Unisa, more especially ever since things have changed now. There are people who don't answer their emails, they don't answer their calls, and when you ask and complain about such things, they say it's due to the power outages. What has their office done to make sure that they do some performance audit of their staff workers who are working from home? And also, you will find out that some of Unisa workers are not really privy to some of Unisa information. In fact, most of us who are student leaders know the system better, more than someone who has degrees from UP and does not know how to operate the Unisa system. That there's a high level of incompetency within the workers of Unisa, and we are saying that given an opportunity, student leaders should be afforded a chance of employment within the institution, because we're of the firm belief that they've got a better understanding of the operation and Unisa systems to be able to fast track the assisting of students in our campuses. Because the call center is not operating, but there are more than 500 people who are employed in that call center. The emails, they are not responding. The lecturers are not responding. We are really concerned about the level of competence of Unisa workers. Ever since we have gone online, fully online, and now when you ask some workers personally that we know, they say that they don't have the necessary tools, be it your data, be it the power outages. So we're very concerned, and we want to say to the acting director that can you please look at that with high speed? Thank you.
Wow, that's quite worrying, I must say. I don't know what question Mafe has to ask, but let me give him this opportunity to pose his question or comment. Then we'll take those two and have another round after that. Mr. Marepete, please.
Oh, thank you for the opportunity. My question is only directed to the second speaker from Risk and Compliance. It's just a brief question in here. Since we are addressing the issues of COVID-19 and then being in an institution that is focused on transformation, he did highlight that there were issues of remuneration, fair remuneration of employees. And then it just caught my eye. And then I just needed to find out how far has Unisa gone or addressed the issue of unfair or unequal payments to black people, between black people and our white counterparts. So I want to know from him, from his side, how far has Unisa gone? Is the progress significant? Has there been any further perpetuation of such practices, or that has been addressed and then we are all operating equally? Thank you.
Thanks for that question. We will start with Dr. Dlamini and then get Mr. Mahlangu to respond to the latter question. Dr. Dlamini, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairperson. I really appreciate the question that is raised by Inga. It's very crucial, which means line managers are not executing their responsibilities. Because as human resources, we act upon information that is provided to us by line managers in their respective environment. However, since this matter, we have brought it to my attention, Inga, I will appreciate if you can actually provide us with information so that we can look at it, because employees are dealt with in line with Unisa policies. And we cannot have a situation wherein students are suffering, because you are all our children. And history will judge us in the event we are not doing what is required. Let's say you are coming from the rural area and you are studying with the money coming from your grandmother. And at the end of the day, you call and we are not getting the service, yet we are looking at future leaders. It cannot be business as usual. It is really disappointing, because the primary function is the teaching and learning, and students are the main customers to us. Therefore, I'm opening my hands and I'm willing to work with you so that we address these issues in the environment that you are referring to. And I hope also you will also take it up with the Office of the Registrar, including the Dean, the Dean of Students, because we have to ensure that students are actually assisted. It cannot be business as usual, wherein students can complain all over, but they're not being assisted. I am raising my hand. I'm saying I'm here. I'm more than willing to hear your concerns, and whosoever is an employee of the university who is found not to be actually delivering according to their service, we will actually speak to their line managers and ensure that they do what is right in terms of the law. I thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Dlamini, for that. It's a hard one, honestly, and but I like your invitation of let's just get more information, because it is with evidence and information before us that we're able to deal with the challenges that are being brought before us. So without wanting to blow the horn of our portfolio, I have a policy of monthly reports and get to have one-on-one meetings with my management. So it's a question of how far close are you to the people that you should be servicing and those that are managers to the service providers for our students in particular and partners. So I think this is a question that Inga may want to take up with Dr. Dlamini. She's the only Dr. Phumzile Dlamini at Unisa, unless I'm not aware of any other, so you can do that on email. She's very good on email, unlike somebody else I know that I will not quote right now, who's quite bad, myself, that is. So let's just then move on to the question posed by Mr. Morapedi. Are you able to respond to that, Vusi? I don't know how you'll handle that one at a global level. It may not be your question, but let's hear you.
You're right, Program Director, but thanks for the question and thanks for raising it. Yeah, so we do not have information to the effect that the university has two pay structures for Black people and for white people. So as a compliance function, we are not privy to that information. But if there is evidence to that effect, I think it is wrong for the university to be doing that if that is actually the case. And then I would request that if you have such information, please pass it on to us, because it is a non-compliance issue with the Employment Equity Act and the code of practices issued under that act. So my answer shortly is that we do not have any information to that effect. Thank you.
Okay. We will see. I think possible as a way forward, it's a very good question that Mafia is asking, that possible we need to be checking on how best we work with it and provide data. Does the data that we have speak to the realities or any knowledge or facts that we have on the ground? So it's a question that possible we may want to raise with my fellow VP of Strategy and Advisory Services, the institutional research reports to him. It may be something that we may want to do, but possible it is an HR matter. I don't know where it sits, but I see it fair and squarely sitting within the institutional research that's headed by Prof. Ndlovu to check on what's really happening there. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, I see that we are 2:45, which is 15 minutes ahead of the time. But I must thank you. I'm checking with my team if there are any questions that have come through for us to use the last a few minutes to wrap up. Anything from your end, Innocentia?
No, Prof. No, I must say that we've had a bit of audience online, but there's no questions.
Okay.
Unless there's a new message I see. Let me just have a look.
Okay.
No, Prof. No questions.
Okay. Thank you so much. At this juncture, I want to appreciate everyone that's made it to this round table, as it actually states. It's just a space wherein we, without going too much into and wanting to be super scholarly about the narrations and discussions that we have, the intention is to share our experiences, our lived experiences, that is, in terms of topics that relate to whatever we get to talk about. Hence, we refer to it as a round table, that we are around a round table. In the past, elsewhere, during my youthful years, we'll have this brown bag where we get through from such conversations, draw research topics, as well as draw from research studies to be able to inform us better. And I'm happy that we've had this first Asikhulume Roundtable discussion hosted by Unisa Press, and I must start off by thanking the press for making it a possibility for this to be held in the manner that it has been held. I see that there is a question from Manele. We'll look at, I think it's a comment, but with that said, I can't read and speak. I'm very disadvantaged there. Actually, I call it as a disability, if possible. But as we wrap up, we are reflecting on all of what has gone past these 2 hours or so, and want to thank the organizers of this roundtable discussion, but also thank the panel, some of whom actually we got to tell you on the 11th hour about your participation because of some of the colleagues that have somehow pulled out or due to other responsibilities they have had could not avail. And of course, without an audience that's available in other platforms as well as on Teams, we will not have had this recorded conversation from which we have been quite intent on broadcasting it in other forms as well as on our platforms as a record of the things that we get to discuss and seize ourselves with. So colleagues, and those that are of course working, because some schools are a bit closed now and some colleagues will be working with or in the context of some of them being on leave or on sick leave, like Dr. Dlamini, who I very much appreciate for having availed for the 3 hours, for the 2 hours while we get to do this kind of work. And indeed, load shedding is a problem, but what has come out from all the panel members is that it is important that we are cognizant of the context in which we work, we plan well, we respect each other, be whatever level that we are at, that dignity is important, and that to take a leaf from Dr. Dlamini's words was that it is important that reconsideration of the human rights that are balanced is very, very important for us to be able to see and appreciate the non-erosion of communal life, as she makes reference to that. A leaf I want to take from Mr. Mahlangu's sharing was that it's very crucial that in what we do, we consider also the accountability, not just only the rights, but also the accountability and responsibilities of the employer, but also of the employees. Doing so, taking cognizant of the fact that HR should evolve, and unless HR evolve, should I paraphrase him, we shall cease to be productive. So he puts forward. And then we also had Mr. Nkuna Rifumo, where he was griping, rightfully so, about his take on the lack of access control as well as security that gets compromised, which somehow often leave us with risks of a whole lot number, as he did make mention of them, but amongst others made reference to and posed the question that none of us have responded to: what role is played by management in this context to ensure that there's safety, to ensure that there's right to equality, to ensure that there's access control. And of course, the question that I could so very much relate to about accessing campus. For some of us who probably, depending on where you stay, if you live like some of us in Centurion, you know that you have 2 sinkholes that you've got to try to work around to get to the office. And of course, they make your could have been 45 minutes drive, easily an hour and a half, at times surprisingly 2 hours. So these are questions that the panel members have posed to ask, how could we do differently? That's what I'm reading from all of what has been said. And of course, Inganati has really posed very uncomfortable questions to us, those that should indeed, as we are promoting human rights, those that talk of, are we really taking cognizant of the less fortunate, of those that are disadvantaged, to use his words, of those that actually have had and have forced to plagiarize, this is his argument, and have had to fail due to power outages, due to what he terms as skills that are not up to scratch and that are not responding adequately to the experiences that are not meaningful or those that are actually not healthy enough of, in particular, the disadvantaged. And therefore, he says the capacity to perform well is very important, and that as he ended, it is the teaching and learning that gets affected, and he calls all of this the crisis. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. At this juncture, we declare our 9th Asikhulume Roundtable discussion having come to an end, and I want to thank you all for making it a success. You have a good afternoon ahead. Siyabonga. Ngileboga. Goodbye.
Thank you, colleagues, and goodbye.
Thank
you,
colleagues, and goodbye.
Thank you,
Thank
goodbye.
you. Bye, everyone.
Bye, colleagues.
Prof, how are you? How did that go?
I think it went well. I must thank you for
Can I
weaving.
just stop
Yeah.
everyone in case it's still showing on YouTube? Please,
Yes,
can you please ask
yes,
for Thenjiwe
please.
to advise?
It's actually a good idea, Sam.
I know, because it's before 3 o'clock. So
Okay,
This is
somebody.
It is
Cynthia.
still
Are we-
playing on YouTube. I think it's time difference because it's a little bit at the back, but it's still playing on YouTube.
Oh, okay. So what do we do? What do you advise we do?